everybody. Thank you for joining us for this fireside chat as part of our 2024 FreightWaves Domestic Supply Chain Summit. I'm Kaylee Nix, and I'm here with Cassandra Gaines, and maybe a familiar face to you if you've been around the FreightWaves space before, but you are the founder of Carrier Assure. And Cassandra, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to continue talking about fraud. I feel like the hottest topic in the industry, right?
It is, and it's not going to end anytime soon. So buckle in and be ready over maybe the next 6 months until the economy starts, maybe, I'm hoping, getting better.
Around. Yeah,
and we'll see better.
We saw fraud really kind of highlight the top of everybody's mind, especially with our most recent Freight Tech 25 rankings. Highway, of course, came out number 1, really showing that fraud still continues to be a major problem in the industry. And if you go and poll anyone, any broker especially, they're going to tell you like, yeah, I'm really worried about the bad actors in the space. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of trends and kind of how sophisticated people have gotten with trying to scam others out of their money.
Oh, every time it gets more and more sophisticated. And just when we feel like, all right, we're getting the hang of things, we are getting an adjustment on the fraud, we're getting ahead of it, they figure out a way to get us again. And so if you hold on, I'll tell you one you've never heard about that is growing and costing brokers and shippers hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I want to take one step back and let you know that I have, just so for people who don't know me, I've been a transportation attorney for the last 10 years in the industry. And I've worked for some of the biggest brokers and truckers in the industry, and I love cargo theft. And that was one of the reasons I founded Carrier Assure, which you add to the onboarding applications like Highway to give you an understanding of what carriers, brokers you're hiring to avoid these problems. So because I give you that background, you already know all this.
Yeah.
And most people do. But I give that background so that you guys are like, why is Cassandra telling us about this new type of theft and why does she know about it? And a lot of our customers will come to tell us, this is what's going on, can you help us? And this is a very difficult type of theft. It is, I don't know if you've heard about this, it's like they alter the PODs. Mm-hmm. So the truck driver goes, picks up the goods, let's say it's a full shipment of TVs, we'll make it easy. And they're supposed to pick up 280 TVs. And so they pick it up, they get the 280, but then they send the BOL and POD to somebody who alters it, and you can barely notice that they will change the amount to maybe 200 or 180. And then it looks like perfect, nobody's altered it. And then they go to deliver it, consignee's like, 180, okay, looks good, I have 180, but they've really stolen the remaining amounts. And they have very sophisticated ways now to get the doors open without people knowing. And they'll do little bit by little bit. And they know that the consignees and the companies buying the product take a long time to do an inventory reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And so they do this for like a month. And they'll take bit by bit by bit, and then they disappear. And it's a carrier you know and trust, who's been doing a good job for a while as well. So it's not like it's a carrier that we normally could detect for fraud and theft. That's why this is like, it's so terrifying. And so I speak all over the country on this, trying to educate law enforcement, insurance, shippers, and brokers about this because we hear about it more and more and more.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about it in kind of this like piecemeal way of doing theft, right? Because everybody thinks like, oh, freight theft, you're stealing an entire trailer worth of those 280 TVs, right? Or you're scamming people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars by taking their loads and then marking them up or double brokering them or what have you. But it really is, it's almost like petty theft that it gets people. And then because you are maybe a shipper who is shipping those 280 TVs and you're like, we're going to cut our losses on this 100 and just say like, whatever, no problem. Because it's not going to be worth it to fight it for the recovery. And then your local law enforcement doesn't want to fight it. And then, on and on and on, say la vie, these bad actors never actually get punished because the back end of the law can't fight it or doesn't see it valuable enough to fight it. That's why we have to rely on people who are really savvy, right? A savvy shipper, savvy broker, and an honest carrier, which is where tech tools like Carrier Assure, like Highway, like those onboarding platforms come into business, right?
Absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit about how things have maybe changed since you launched Carrier Assure and what you guys are now working towards in terms of like a big overarching goal.
Yeah, good question. So when we launched Carrier Assure, which was 2 years ago, theft really wasn't a thing. But what was a thing is making sure that carriers were performing. They weren't dropping the loads. They weren't, doing different things and giving brokers and shippers a hard time. And then theft and fraud hit. And so it was good timing. It was lucky for us. And then Carrier Assure exploded and adding us to the onboarding applications. We partner with them. We integrate with them so that the combination is helping avoid the theft and problems. But the future of what I'm looking for is with CarrierSure is I want CarrierSure to be the industry standard, like a credit score, but also for brokers. So we just released a broker score as well. Because carriers are telling us over and over again, there are great brokers out there, but there are so many brokers that are not doing the right thing. I just had a broker last week that refused to pay a carrier because they weren't tracking the shipment. And the carrier produced evidence of tracking, clear-cut evidence. The broker refused to pay.
Ugh.
And it's things like that. And so I called up the broker and I was like, pay them. Why aren't you paying them? And they kind of gave me some excuses, but I found out there were 3 other instances. So there's a lot of these brokers kind of hurting our carrier community.
Yeah.
And I want that to stop. We need more transparency of who we're working with.
Yeah.
And illuminate the top players, the ones who are doing great things. And then get rid of the people who just aren't doing good things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that word transparency was something that I think was kind of an industry buzzword, like maybe 2019 to 2021, right? But that was within relation to like location tracking. And like, where is my freight? Where are my goods? And now it's the opposite way around. And you mentioned that kind of symbiotic relationship that has to happen. It does have to go both ways because you can't throw all the blame on issues on a carrier, even though that's where a lot of people like to place it for some reason. I don't know if they just think they're easy targets or what. A lot of the responsibility does end up being upstream, whether that's with a shipper who has negligent practices of that's tracking their stuff or following up with claims or things like that, or the broker who is just trying to make a quick buck on somebody who's a little bit unsusceptible, right? And when we look at where the way that the industry has to go, a lot of that has to do with like these person-to-person relationships and just being a good human first.
Hands down, be a good human first.
But the transparency in that conversation is the first step. So how do we do it other than relying on tech tools? How do we just say, hey, cut the crap. Like, tell me, are you going to mess with my stuff or not? And are you going to be honest about it?
I think the wonderful thing about technology, and I know you're thinking the same thing, the wonderful thing about technology speeds things up and makes things so much easier. But having those phone calls, like picking up the phone and building that relationship, I mean, I would tell you the majority of great brokers and shippers out there will tell you, like nothing changes just picking up the phone and making a good relationship with whoever you're working with. Brokers want shippers on the phone to talk about the dynamics of their shipping and the issues that they have, but they also want carriers.
Right.
People forget that these days. I do too. Like I want to text people. I don't want to talk on the phone and I'm busy, you know?
Yeah.
And picking up the phone is so much more valuable. I think that is just, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very important. But I do worry about our carrier community. I think that they're getting pinched from the costs. And you guys have reported on this many times, the cost of fuel, the cost of maintaining, the cost per mile it takes to run a truck, but then also the carrier community is telling us that they have brokers giving them misinformation, so they don't give them a full, like the appropriate quote, because there was a 4-hour wait at the shipper or consignee, or they're getting hit for fines, lots and lots and lots of fines and fees and their rate confirmation. And so I worry about our carrier community when it comes to that. And I think that's one of the reasons sometimes they resort to double brokering, stealing, or not having insurance.
And it's interesting, you mentioned at the beginning is everybody's hopes for the market to flip around. And obviously we've been in a market where shippers are very much in control. They have all the pricing power. And that was a really quick and very direct flip from 2020, 2021 when the carriers had all of this control. And I almost feel like when you're in a market where there is this excess of capacity, where carriers are making money hand over fist, basically setting their own prices, that gives you the ability for more nefarious activity to find its way in, right? People are desperate to find coverage for their freight. They're desperate to find people to haul for them. And it lowers your standards necessarily. And then it's harder to weed out those people who are in those low standards once you see the market flip. Has that been kind of what you've seen?
100%. And the fraudsters know. So for example, you guys did an article on this, Clarissa. It was an amazing article. She was very quick to get it out. And it was about fraud that happened over July 4th. And all these carriers were involved in it. It was bad. Brokers got taken for lots of money. And it's because the fraudsters knew that on Friday, before the weekend started for the holiday, that the brokers would lower their standards and shippers too, because they were trying to move those lows.
They're trying to get it covered, yeah.
And they took advantage of them.
Yeah.
So it plays exactly into what you're saying. And I think that everybody has to remember and hold to their standards when they can, especially when we get around holidays.
Yeah. Yeah, just because, you might be paying a little bit more doesn't mean that you should get away, because you'd rather pay more
Yep.
and not have something happen to your load than to pay a little bit less, save a little bit, and then have to file a claim and deal with insurance and all of the above, right?
Yep. I think one more thing that people forget about that plays into the fraud and theft. And this is a little bit painful because over the past 4 years, lots of companies have reached to offshoring. And there are some amazing companies, including Lean, that does an amazing job with offshoring. And then there's other companies, right? And so what happens though is we've educated those outside our industry
Right.
on our weaknesses. And so a lot of the fraud and the theft that's going on is done by folks outside our country. And they know where our weaknesses are, like the bill of ladings being and the PODs being altered. They know, and they're playing on that. And I spoke at a law enforcement conference 2 weeks ago in Indiana. Great people. And they are, God bless them, they are working hard to try and help our industry. But their biggest thing is it's happening from people overseas, or they disappear in the US and go back overseas. And so law enforcement can't do anything.
Yeah.
And that becomes so difficult for them, and then also for our community as well.
Yeah.
So something to be aware of.
It's something that's interesting for sure, especially in the context of talking domestic versus international freight and things that we could get into for far longer than the time we have here today. Before I let you go, though, I want to kind of pick your brain on where you think the big issues are going to go changing. As we see the market start to flip and we see carriers start to come back into a little bit of their own power, if not getting back to more equilibrium between shippers and carriers, where do we think that we're going to see the biggest challenges to continued fighting the fraud and continued safety and continued taking care of those carriers like you mentioned? Where's that going to be?
Safety is going to be very big. I think that as the market churns, which it will, and you guys have done some great reporting on that, and we're kind of re-energized all of us and could have put a good buzz in the industry. But I do feel as though over the past few years, everybody's been so focused on fraud and theft that safety has been kind of set aside by government and all of us. And I think as the carriers get more power, the rates will go up. They also need to be continued to be focused on the safety, because plaintiff attorneys haven't gone away. And we've seen some crazy big verdicts. And if you're wondering what they are, literally go on FreightWaves webpage. You can see all of them. Like, there's some scary verdicts out there that we can't forget.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be a very important piece of 2025.
And go watch our talk from the Future Freight Festival with Matt Leffler, who's also a transportation attorney, and John Kingston. They talk about the Warner case, they talk about broker carrier liability, and it's a really interesting, very weedy, and he told me to say this, non-legal advice talk. So
he also has 4 babies.
Yes.
He's a busy man.
He is a busy man. Cassandra, thank you so much for joining us for the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. For people who want to catch up with you, maybe learn a little bit about CarrierSure, get on the platform, start making good decisions when it comes to carriers, or if you're a carrier, start making better decisions when it comes to brokers, where can they go to do that?
Go to CarrierSure.com. You can report brokers, you can report carriers for free, you can see a lot of information, there's promo codes, and you can follow me, Cassandra Gaines, on LinkedIn. We give out lots of education and webinars to try to help everybody through these problems, even if they're not a customer.
There you go. The more education, the better. And thank you guys for sticking with us through the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. We will be back with plenty more after this, so don't go away.